Andrew Huberman is yes, he's good when it comes to sharing information, and he's good when it comes to exposing, I would argue, good practices in science, putting references inside of the description and talking about the studies. The studies he picks are questionable, and some of the views that he shares are also questionable because I don't think he's as critical as I would like a professor to be, but obviously everyone is different, so you can pick holes in everyone, including myself. And then I guess it should be fairly obvious, but for those regular listeners, for those not, we take a different approach to psychology to Andrew. Andrew is heavily ingrained within cognitive psychology and neuroscience. We are not. We are ecological psychologists.
We are not. It's
I
been
think,
quite entertaining this week because I've been doing a lot of work. So I jumped into one of the research papers this week and was like, oh, this is fascinating. Okay. Because there was a bit of the ecological approach that I was like, okay, cool. I get affordances to a degree, obviously. And it was really interesting to read the deep brain OCD paper of like thank you for that, by the way. That was from your massive video that I haven't even gone through yet.
right. You say massive video. It's 2 hours and 6 minutes. Andrew Huberman's podcasts are average 2 hours. So I think where the video differs from his podcast, and this is just from my biased view, of course, is Andrew when he talks on his podcast, there are lots of how do I would say there's lots of fluff in the conversation. Whether that's helpful or not, it depends on the person listening. For those new to the topic, it could be helpful to give context. For those familiar with the context, it's just fluffy information that I would normally sort of skim read through in an article. So the depth at which the conversation goes can be quite narrow and shallow sometimes. But
Mm.
and then in other areas where he has expertise, such as the vision and brain, like proteins and things, it's like, oh yeah, loads of information in there. So even though his podcasts are long, they're not necessarily deep all the way through. Whereas my video, taking away the story bit at the start, which I think is quite fluffy, it's deliberately fluffy. It's
I,
very
I
deep.
I disagree. I don't think it was fluffy.
Really?
Yeah, it didn't feel fluffy. I suppose, yes, it was fluffy, but it was a very condensed fluffy. Like normally when I watch fluffy stuff,
Yep.
or when I'm consuming content with a lot of fluff, it's like I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. Right, you could have said that in like a sentence. All of the fluff that you had was condensed so much that it actually had a lot of depth in the fluffy stuff. So yes, it wasn't directly related to the, well, it was directly related to the topic, but it also, without expertise, maybe it looks like it's not.
Yeah. The relationship is far more reaching than
Mm.
the actual
Yeah.
topics. But I mean, as soon as you get into so for those that haven't watched or listened to the video, the first 10 minutes, the first 10 minutes is my story. It's
Yeah.
not my life story, but it's a story about how I was introduced to the ecological approach, ecological psychology, and ecological dynamics. But as soon as that story finishes, it goes straight into, well, the existence of things. The what is knowledge is like the first chapter. So it goes extremely deep into philosophical views of how we perceive the world. And it just goes deeper and deeper from there. I mean, at one point, I'm talking about physics, like deep physics, thermodynamics. And I think because the video has lots of depth in lots of different areas, it's not one of those videos that you can just sit down and listen to, or like an Andrew Huberman podcast. I can walk the dog or I can walk wherever and sort of listen along. I could do that with my video, but only because I'm very familiar with it. I
I
think
couldn't.
I think
I
most people
wanted
would sit there and be like, I got to pause, I got to think about the what, I got to rewind.
yeah,
I
especially
assume
when
you're
you were
not.
getting on the later half of the video. Like I was like, oh, 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 oh. And I had to just pause and be like, okay, cool.
Give me a second.
Let me process that for a moment.
Oh, look at you. Look at you with your information processing. Uh, but yeah, so that I guess that's adding a bit of context to the Andrew Huberman bit, and where I think it's interesting to talk about Andrew and all scientists online is that for context, I'm at the moment editing a video about Andrew Huberman because Andrew, for better or worse, has done some questionable things in his personal life. How relevant people believe someone's personal life is to their public life is a really interesting topic of conversation for me. One, I'm obviously sharing stuff online, so I have an online profile. It's nowhere near as large as Andrew's, but it's an online profile. I can get into a Zoom call with some people and then go, "Oh, it's really weird, you're a YouTuber." So I do have a presence. I'm not just this guy that they've met on a Zoom call all of the time, but sometimes I am. And Andrew, in a recent article, was some people essentially tried to cancel him for him cheating on multiple partners, but he tries to define the relationship in a different way, and some of the behaviors that he has in person, him being flaky and not responding to people, prioritizing some things over other things, him not paying attention to some people more than others, and it was very much a personal attack on Andrew's person, characteristics, character, but it doesn't necessarily address the science that he's sharing. The science that he's sharing is critiqued by, I would argue, experts because the explanations he gives aren't easily critiquable by those everyday people.
Mm.
Unless you're familiar with the norepinephrine and dopamine and how all the systems work, you can't really critique it, which is why I don't, because I don't understand those systems. I can critique it from a broad level and say, okay, great, the brain's active, so what? Like, what does that mean? I can
Thank goodness
critique,
the brain's active, otherwise we would all be a bit fucked.
oh yeah, but apart from that, I'm just like, I don't know. But when you start looking at some of the other things that he's spoken about outside of his expertise, like sugar, how is sugar related to vision? I really don't know. And like the cold water stuff, the like the warm ups, the cold water, that is where I have expertise because my strength and conditioning. And some of the stuff that he talks about there, I'm like, that's not right. Similar with sleep and Matthew Walker. I've read around sleep because it relates to performance. And some of the stuff that Matthew Walker was talking about, which has been critiqued by Alexi Guzzi, which go back into the history of all that sort of stuff. Andrew is talking about science, which some people argue is pseudoscience, some people would argue it's misinformation. And that's one critique, but that's his online profile critique. Then there's this personal characteristics critique. You're like, well, they're related, but how significant are they to him as a source of information? And that's the conversation that I kind of wanna have today a little bit. So, John, you mentioned that some people have asked you about Andrew. How would you describe your experiences with Andrew?
I think that's the. I can't think of a better.
That sounded like a Voldemort's dying like breath.
Yeah, I one because it is a completely different approach. Everything that I hear makes me go, ooh, a little bit.
Do you want to
So it's
elaborate on
hard
that?
to listen as an ecological psychologist, like, oh, dopamine, oh, please stop. Because it's just saying the same it's saying the same stuff with the same assumptions that are stopping that are constraining like the environment of so many people who are struggling with these developmental disorders, these psychiatric disorders, the like who have real problems, and it's just being boiled down to focus more, dopamine hacking, like that whole spiel. And it's like, if it's that
I,
simple, everyone would have done it.
I found it interesting. I was having a look at this is how sad I am, or how rigorous I am, I guess, depending on which view you take. I was having a look at trend lines for the word dopamine, and guess what? When Andrew did his episode on dopamine with ADHD, the term dopamine in Google Trends increases. And so essentially, before 2021, dopamine was like really, really low. No one really was really looking for it because it was a science jargon term. Then Andrew Huberman talks about dopamine and then it goes up. And then his episode comes out about ADHD, and it goes up again and it stays up. And then now that it's sort of it's decreased from the sort of like the big exposure to it, but now it's still well above where it was before Andrew. So those that weren't talking about it now are talking about it, which is good.
Mm,
But they don't necessarily have the same expertise as Andrew talking about it, or the same expertise as all the people before the big trend were talking about it. So
mm.
it's become a buzzword, trend word inside of popular science that isn't necessarily accurately representing what the dopamine system is doing,
Yeah, it was interesting
or
because
not necessarily doing.
I was working with a marketing coach, and they have a wonderfully dynamic way of doing marketing, which I was like, oh, I'm instantly interested because you're working with dynamics. And one of the exercises was a content tree. It was starting from a question and kind of exploring all of the possibility. And of course, for me, I also had another tab open because at the same time I was reading the paper and looking into that because it was the whole of that paper was like, yeah, pretty much. It was very focused on actions and thing that was what I wanted to look at and focus on, especially from the lens of neurodiverse, neurodevelopmental disorders, whatever you want to call it. And so that was like, oh, interesting. And so I had that, and my coach was just like, you just make things harder for yourself. I'm like, right, one, that's an assumption, because
Big
actually it's
assumption.
not. Because having that makes this easier. And as we were going through, I had originally it was all the terms. It's interesting because constraint was like, oh yeah, I understand what a constraint meant. I'm like, cool, interesting, good to know. Because they know of the traditional approach and very little of the ecologicals. Um, and then I was like, okay, cool. So here are some terms, and we got to a point where we were like trying to just get some broad areas of writing because I find myself going very deep.
Just to confirm here, so that I'm following the story, you're speaking to the marketing coach about terms from ecological psychology and how to market them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and so we were going through, and I was like, okay, cool. So there are a few pieces in here which, because what I've been doing so far is just talking about the theory because it's the bit that I find really interesting. And to me is the transformational piece. It is that. But obviously, you cannot just talk about ecology. One cannot simply talk about ecological psychology.
Flip that.
And so what I've been doing is thinking about marketing it in a business sense. So it is the action first, which has been really helpful with that paper I read at the same time. It's great. But one of the questions that came out, I was like, okay, cool. So do you know what executive functioning is? And I asked my coach that. And they were like, yeah. So I could talk about that then. Yeah. I'm like, fascinating. Because it's so mainstream now that I can use what is a psychological term, however accurate or inaccurate it is, something point, um, in my content.
Hmm.
Because people are now looking up that, how to solve executive dysfunction, how to stop. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's go there because I'm going to blow your fucking minds.
But this is why it's interesting with Andrew Huberman and all science communicators is they bring words, they bring terms into the public domain. But as we've seen in the majority of cases, because of the simplicity of the explanation or the ignorance of some people that are using the information, those words and terms, and applying them to different contexts, the original research is taken well out of proportion. A popular example inside of practice, coaching, education is deliberate practice. The idea of 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours was just put into context it was not meant for, it was not designed for. And the idea of deliberate practice from Anders Ericsson was the late Anders Ericsson, passed away, I believe. But yeah, he had to like argue for his research against the public explanations because of what Gladwell wrote in his book. Gladwell explained in the book, but he explained to like the public, the gen pop, general population, and Gladwell wasn't ignorant. He wasn't shallow. If you had
Mm.
expertise, because you understood where he was going with it and the arguments he was making, but because if there was some read around knowledge other people from the public were using, they were then using this 10,000 hours, this deliberate practice thing in a way that it wasn't intended for. So I believe, correct, I may need to double check this, but Gladwell had to apologize to Anders for all of the sort of questions and the
I
misuse of
think
his
so.
research.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's the same thing with Maslow's.
In this book, Myths of Sports Coaching. I'm doing a video on that one as well at some point in the
Nice.
future. I've got tons of videos coming out about books, but yeah, I think Andrew Huberman is sort of the Malcolm Gladwell in that scenario. Andrew's talking about these terms and words and science, which it's not inaccurate,
No,
but it oversimplifies to the point where it can be misunderstood and not necessarily applied in the most effective way.
it is from a clinical perspective, isn't it? Like the discussions are often clinical. It's like the because like one thing that I discovered this week is actually ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is not a psychiatric disorder, but ADHD is a psychiatric disorder.
Yep.
ASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and I'm like, interesting, because I always saw them very. I mean, it doesn't bloody matter anyway. It's just a label on a label, but it was interesting, like the relationship of that.
So bit of a sideways tangent for a second. I was on a call, I was on a webinar with UK Coaching, and they were talking about holistic coaching, and it just made me laugh because they had these bubbles about holistic coaching and these areas that we need to try and focus on. And you had cognitive, psychology, emotional, physical, and you got to focus on all these different areas. And I'm like, what's the difference between psychological and cognitive? What's the difference between physical and psychological if we are embodied and enacted and embedded? What's the difference between physical and cognitive? What's the difference between emotional and cognitive? Why do we have all of these labels? What is the difference between holistic coaching and coaching? There isn't one. So why
There
do we
isn't
need all
one.
these words?
It's just it's just effective coaches don't need the labels, whereas ineffective coaches do.
Exactly. It's just the effectiveness of your ability to educate an individual. And I feel like all the words, terms, and jargons are redundant and they add
Mm.
unnecessary complexity to communication,
Mm.
which for me in science communication and for Andrew specifically for this context, that is where, as the science communicator, I really want to question like, if I use this term, this word, affordance, constraint, self-organization, do I have a good justification for using the jargon? If not, say it some other way.
Yeah,
Because otherwise it becomes a buzzword because it's an
yeah.
unfamiliar word inside of the public domain. And as soon as you have a buzzword, it's going to be exploded, obviously, through popular science and pop culture. And it is is just misused. Similar with working memory. I mean, I would say working memory is a buzzword. And for those unfamiliar, working memory as a concept from cognitive psychology, the original, I guess, the original writers about the ideas of working memory, they use the central executive, but they discuss in the pub conversation webinar thing. There was also just sitting down on pub chairs chatting. But it's recorded, it's on YouTube. I think it's like 12 years old now. It's a really poor recording, but I mean, what would you expect that sort of time? And he says, I think it's Alan Badley is his first name. I know it's Badley, but he says the central executive is a placeholder. We don't know. It's what we had at the
Yeah.
time. It's what we're working with at the time, but we don't actually know. It's a placeholder, but people say it so matter of fact. And this is my personal gripe, I guess you could say, with Andrew and his podcast. He talks about the science, which I love. He talks about the references, which I love. He gives caveats, which I love. But he talks about the science as a matter of fact, as our brain works like this. We work like this. This thing does this.
That
But
that's
we,
that is the hard because it just reinforces assumptions, and I'm just like, oh, that
Hmm,
I think that is the hard part of like, this is how things work. This is that. Here's a caveat, but I am right. This is the one way. And when I was speaking to a friend, it's like, I just want to get some things sorted. I'm like, how are they? I'm like,
perfect English.
the reply was simply, I mean, yes, you can watch them. But they have one approach, and
I mean, if we step back, and we look at cognitive psychology and ecological psychology, and we look at the two different approaches that stem from it. I'm expressing this for those that are new to the podcast and are listening, going, "What are they talking about?" Cognitive psychology is where most traditional coaches, educators, science communicators will come from because it's embedded within popular language,
Yeah.
memory, perception, action, and a best technique or an ideal solution, the gold standard, because we need to put motor programs in our brain for the central executive to give our body, for our body to then execute command. You need to pay attention to this thing at this time in the day, and then once you've remembered that enough and it's stored in your memory, your body will just do it. That's essentially the idea of cognitive psychology. Once it's stored in the brain, your body can then execute it. Ecological psychology says no, says we don't store things in our brain. We actually directly perceive, which means that we are perceiving and detecting information in the environment, the organism environment relationship. So when we talk about developing skills, we don't store anything in our brain because that's not how we move. That's not how we perceive. It's not how we act in the world because every situation is different. There is variability. Variability is inevitable. So there's repetition
And
without repetition.
there is also the thing of like, where is it stored everywhere? You could also say, where is it stored everywhere? Because you've got things like muscle memory, which is like embodied.
Yeah.
Like, so if it's stored somewhere, it's everywhere as well. I think that might be quite helpful because it was like, well, the body is involved, and that's a question that kept kind of coming back.
The
Every
brain
time I
is
thought,
obviously playing a part.
yeah, the brain is obviously playing a part, but it's not the only part, which is kind of there is such a focus on
Mhm.
the brain in the traditional cognitive approach versus the ecological approach, which is embedded, embodied, enacted.
Enacted. Yeah. And when it comes to the explanations from Andrew and other science communicators, they are, whether they know it or not, using this ideal best technique linear causality view of explanations. A to B to C to D, now you have the solution. But from those that have experienced the world, like most of us, it doesn't work like that. You can't just do A, B, and C and then D happens.
No.
Life gets in the way is an often sort of trope. Oh, yeah, life just gets in the way. But instead of saying, oh, there's noise, there's background noise, or life just gets in the way, maybe that is part of causality. And that is where the ecological approach looks at multi, non-linear, non-obvious causality. So there are more than one causes, which I think is fairly easy to grasp. Non-linear, meaning it's not A to B to C to D. It could be A and B and C lead to D. So without B, D doesn't happen. Without enough of C, D doesn't happen. So it's non-linear and then non-obvious. Maybe A to B to C are three legs of a table holding up D, but Z that's all the way down the corridor also holds up D. And that's non-obvious. Like, why in the world is that involved? An example of this, which I've used in the video essay I mentioned earlier, is when birds break out of an egg, they twist their head, and them twisting their head to the left makes them left foot dominated. If they twist their head to the right, they are now right dominated. Why? We don't really know from what I can see, but it's an example of non-obvious causality. There is a causal relationship there because you can experiment with it, force birds to move left or right forcibly through testing procedures, obviously ethical, and it just happens. Why? We don't know. It's non-obvious causality. And so when Andrew talks so matter of fact about things in his science communication, it for me doesn't represent human experiences because there is multi non-linear non-obvious causality which he overlooks, whether he knows it or whether he doesn't. He's overlooking it, and that's where the limitations are with his communication and with most
Mm.
communication, including ours. Like,
Yes, absolutely.
our communication has that limitation, but we try in these sorts of podcast episodes to explore various elements as much as possible, which does go backwards in time, of course, because we're talking about timescales here. So past episodes will have gone into more depth in some of these topics. So now that I've set all that up, or I've explained all of that in a way that hopefully brings some context to the conversation, I recognize we're like half an hour in at this point. uh, for science communication and explaining marketing, talking about the ecological approach or science that isn't popular science,
Yeah.
how are you going about doing it, and how would you suggest we talk about this?
Um, so how I'm going about it, and this is in progress,
Evolving.
evolving as it goes. What's emerging for me is it's very much in the ecological kind of sense, it is the very much the actiony part, the things you do, the results that happen. It's capturing those assumptions and moving and talking about those assumptions, and there is that re-education or re-exposure of information or like adding that context, but that isn't as emphasized as I previously assumed because people are just like, and it
Mm.
doesn't matter. There is not that like it's not important to them, and so they have their view and they are like this is way more important. Me getting my tasks complete is way more important than learning about this cool science thing over here. And so that's kind of oh, cool, that's just emerged. I realized reading that paper, here's a good example of nonlinear causality.
Just for context, there the little gerbil running around in the wheel in your head sort of just jumped off and jumped on another one whilst you were like mid conversation.
Yes, 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 it did.
Cognitive
So
psychology reference there. Just
yeah, the
everyone start
gerbil
thinking of
went
gerbils.
flying.
I can just see it now that the string on the gerbil, someone's just like yanked it. It's like, oh, there we go, he's gone.
Rid of that one.
Yeah. Right. So where did the gerbil go, John?
Went to the paper I've been reading, which is entitled "The
Was it phenomenology?
the phenomenology of deep brain stimulation induced changes in OCD, an inactive affordance-based model."
You've got to love academic titling.
I do. It's very fucking funny because
So what
I
does
would
that mean,
never
John?
have thought to search that.
Exactly. That's my point. Like when people say, "Oh, so what do you think I should look for?" I'm like,
Yeah, it is still a daily struggle most of the time. I'm so grateful for the group that we have now. Like, oh, there's a paper. Ooh, interesting. Because
That's why
I would
ResearchGate's
never
so
have
good.
found that.
If you're not in
Um,
ResearchGate or in a group with that sharing papers, like how in the world do you find that title? No one's going to be searching for that.
it's crazy. And what just happened for me, it was talking about the field of affordances and the landscape of affordances. And they have, I think it's a three-piece model on that. Let me get my
Just so that you're accurate. When you're talking about three-piece model, is that the field of affordances or the afforder landscape?
it's the width, depth, and
Yeah, width
height. Yeah.
and color.
And color, yes. Which I was like, oh,
I talk about that in the
yes.
video
Yeah, exactly. And that was that I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I went and grabbed that. I grabbed the paper and looked into it. I was like,
because I
ah,
referenced it.
yeah, because you referenced it. Oh, it was joyful. It was joyful when you referenced it. It was sent in our little group of a little clip of it. I was like, oh, I go look at that because that's actually very interesting for me. Let me go. I have only gone into this one paper so far. There is a list of 4 or 5 in my Zotero to go through next.
I mean, I think I referenced like 70 papers in that article. So,
Yeah, I'm not even gonna try.
and that's what I mean. Like, as I mentioned at the start, like, I think Andrew has like 15, maybe 20 references using meta-analysis in his podcasts. I'm, I mean, I've got a video at the moment that I'm scripting. I think I have 67 or 68 references for a 40, 50-minute video. It's like a reference a minute.
Yeah.
And they're not like simple references either. Some of them are 40, 50 page articles. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, what's just happened, and it was just a boom and explosion, is I realized the width, depth, and height, and like the field of affordances has helped me to constrain the environment of me producing content of around like this is what we care about. These are the things that we perceive. These are the things that my audience perceive as important. And it's not the science, it's the how to actually get stuff done in my very unique constrained context. And so it's like, okay, cool. So I take that and it went to the question. Now, when I was working with the marketing coach, I went very constrained straight away
Yep.
went very specific, and actually I was challenged to go broad because of course I'm already here, and so there needs to be that like it's almost like a breadth of content that then links together.
How I'm curious how you could be broad without oversimplifying, because if we use Andrew as an example, his expertise is vision, and he's gone like everywhere, and he doesn't have expertise in cold baths and sugar like that. That's not his area. So how can you do that?
How I have done that is very much there is so the big question that I wanted to go because and what I hear is how do I get my life and business in order, which is ridiculously scarily broad. And then from there, I'm kind of moving in. It's like, okay, so how do you do that? Well, what is your plan? What is emerging is like, what is your plan? Like how are you going to do it? And then it's do it,
Great, thanks.
which is
Really
which
helpful.
is exactly where most people stop. It's the go and plan and then go and do it.
I find it interesting that because I'm having a conversation at the moment in Discord, and the doing it bit seems to be where a lot of people stop, as you say,
Mm.
and there's no answer, there's no advice, there's no guidance, there's no system or setup or protocol, whatever you want to. At the end of the day, you actually need to do the thing. Like you need to move body parts to get
Yeah.
something done.
And so where I got to just, and this is emerging as it always is, there is the managing assumptions piece of like basically I put in brackets executive dysfunction because that is the assumption there is something wrong with how I operate. And so there is a piece of like managing that expectations and then going, well, how do I actually do things? How do we go about, and this has been something I've been kind of focused on for a while. It's like, how do you actually do it? And then that's kind of diving into the constraints led approach and all
Hmm.
of that lovely stuff of like adding the constraints, like what actions you're going to like the things you're actually going to do, the enacted part, and then the behaviors of like there is an argument to say that the behaviors kind of belong on the other side of in the planning pieces, but they're all very much like
They're coupled.
they're all coupled, but also there is I have been told off multiple times by my marketing coach because the idea is that it's supposed to go like this and then continues to break out a
You
little
are
bit further.
on our podcast, John. What does
Oh
it?
yeah. It spreads out and there's more things that come off of each other. It's like
Tree.
a tree. Except I started making my tree go back in again. Uh
That right there is because when you said that to start with, I didn't like it, and when you're explaining it there, the tree adds constraints, of course, because
yes,
it's
it
a
was
way
a
to
yeah, because
design.
I was exactly the same as you. When it first I was like, I hate this. I hate this. This is non-linear. Like I cannot do this linearly.
Yeah.
But then I recognized it was a constraint. I actually said that in the session as well. Ah, this is a constraint. She turned around and went, right, I'm constraining you to do it this way. I'm like,
Yeah.
all
See,
right, fine.
but for me, that is not the constraints-led approach because it's not guiding you for self-organization. It's guiding you to her way, to the way that she wanted you to do it. So that's constraining for a best solution, not constraining for self-organization.
Oh yeah, I also just was like, okay, cool. Let's assume that this is one way and we'll see what happens. Because all I was doing was going, okay, that connects here, that also connects here, and in these multiple different places, like both of us could see the multiple causality of it, but it was just an exercise in doing the ding. Otherwise, I just don't write things and then I just get caught up. Um, so it was a useful, so I self-organized that one.
When you say you just don't write things, what do you mean?
That's not entirely true. It is more of the I don't write the most effective things for what I'm doing because I have a constraint of time and energy and people. And so it was writing the most efficient things, most effective things for what's happening now.
But how do you know if something's effective or efficient?
I know if it's effective if the results or things occur from it.
So you're measuring performance by results or performance.
I'm measuring.
So you're
Performance
measuring your practice by the results, knowledge of performance.
to a certain degree, yes.
Because if you're measuring it by results and performance, then obviously it's goal directed, but it means that you're going to be constrained and tailored to the desired results you want. And
Mm,
if there is a result that is the best result, then it might be the most effective to get that result. But if you want a different result, it's not effective anymore.
yeah, I think there was a constraint on it at first, and then it was moving to this kind of took that constraint away. I had a constraint of like, right, this is what I'm trying to do. I want to sell this thing and get this thing out in the world because,
Yeah, but
well,
that's two different things. They're two different results. Selling this thing, getting it out into the world. Getting it out in the world is far different from selling this
oh
thing.
yeah, yeah, no, that's true. I want to sell this thing, make the money because that's what a business is. It's a thing to make
Well, yeah.
money. I know, it's scary, right? That was kind of the main thing. And I was also very interested in sharing the research because it's interesting and talking about it in a business context because it's very interesting.
Yeah, because for me, I'm curious about how the marketing coach, educator, helper, person, facilitator, whatever, um, what like what their purpose in the organism environment relationship was, or organism environment relationship, because there's two obviously in there, but in that dynamical system for yeah, see you mouthing it. In in that dynamical system for you learning your learning experiences, I'm curious what they were doing, because if they are the educator in that situation and they are guiding you towards a certain outcome, is the outcome to get it published? If it is, why would you need a person to help you with that, because you've done things like that before? And if it's to get more money, well, now they have a specific result or performance they're looking for, which can constrain the way that you behave. Obviously, that's kind of the point.
I think the outcome was to um make it easier to do the thing because that is one of the things that I have been like
What does do the thing mean?
exactly everything.
So you you struggle with creating what? Time? Because it comes down to affordances. You are not
Yeah,
perceiving,
it is very much the time and making every bit of what I'm doing count as such
or
and
making you
ensuring that
feel like it counts.
not necessarily, well, yes, I suppose it is actually make it feel like it counts.
If
That's
you
true.
sit down, if you sit down and go, I'm going to work towards getting this product published, that then you will do that. To what extent, to what degree will change depending on the situation and at that point in time, or through that point in time at least. But having someone else help you and guide you, you can be more directed, which I would imagine
Yeah.
is what the coach educator is for. So it's you wanted someone to guide your practice.
Yes, it was very much a guided practice because all of the because when it comes to kind of the content piece, my biggest struggle is which one. And I noticed from feedback from people and the lots of different things of like when I wrote content, it was incredibly long, which was not working.
How do you know it wasn't working?
Limited responses, people were asking questions, were n not really engaging when I spoke to people. There was limited engagement from that. And I was content like there was regular, it wasn't just like, oh, I sent one and it didn't work. This was regularly sending stuff out.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like if is contact from someone a good thing? That's what I'm thinking about, because when you look at Andrew Huberman's stuff, his stuff's long as well. And he doesn't get contact from a lot of people because they're listening on a podcast. So he doesn't know when they're listening and when they're not. It's the
Ah,
views.
yeah, no, that's a good point. I think it is as it was sent as an email, it's the email piece which is often replied to. So there is a constraint in there that people do not want to be an assumed behavior. That's probably what it is.
Right.
Of like people don't want to be reading really long emails. And
Okay.
so the platform itself and also with what I know of my audience, shorter is better and more effective.
Y- I still don't know about that. Shorter is better and more effective for what? For them to read it quickly and then move on with their day?
That's true.
I'm trying to work out what the essentially what the point of the content is. Is it to get people to read something and go, oh, that's great, thanks for sharing, and then them leave and then not think about it again?
No, I suppose it isn't. That's true. It is very much to
Because I've had the same like thought because creating content, you're going to come up with similar problems. How long do you make content? What's the point of making the content? I could make content that goes viral because I could
I,
yeah.
I think it is. It's what's the point? I've always struggled to pack it to market or package what I'm doing. It's always been something that I find really difficult because I am when I write, it's very much just me writing, and
Mhm.
it whatever emerges as I'm writing happens, and off it goes. But the difficulty there is that I'm bouncing between topics, and so packaging that is really fucking difficult.
Well, it if you just package it as what it is, then people will consume it if it's useful to them. So what is the point of the content? If the point of the content is for you to share your experiences, that's the point. If the point of
Mm.
the content is to help other people, then maybe you could do give tips, tricks, and hacks. But if that doesn't match with the way that you feel that is most effective for their learning, then you wouldn't do that. And for me, I don't think giving tips, tricks, and hacks is the most effective way to
Yeah,
help
no,
individuals learn.
there is no tips, tricks, and hacks.
No. So that's why I choose to make longer, more dense, nuanced videos. I mean, even the videos that I have on my on the bigger channel, the Danny Talks Tech channel, the videos aren't, hey, look, here's this app, you can push these buttons, now we're done,
Yeah,
5 minute review over. No. It's okay, I've got a spreadsheet. I'm going to look at every single feature of these four apps and I'm going to compare them all.
yeah,
Because that for me is more effective because you can look at pros and cons of each tool and go backwards and forwards between them to see misconceptions about what a tool can or can't do, limitations, feature availability, or nuances about how features work. That to me is more effective. Will it get less views? Yes,
mm.
but I would argue it's more effective for those people learning. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay getting 700 views on a 2 hour video, but
Oh
helping
yeah,
300 people that rather than getting 400,000 listens to a podcast and everyone
yeah.
going,
I
oh,
think for
yeah, that's
me,
right.
it's very much not the amount of views. It is very much reaching the people who need it most, those who have very limited, those who have perceived limited time. So when they open an email and it's 1,000 plus, words, the instant reaction is and they just don't read it.
Mm.
And so that is the piece that I'm kind of focused on. It is slightly, it needs to be as long as it needs to be, but I think there's such a, there's less depth of what I'm saying and more just saying things, which has its place and sometimes they will happen. But I'm also wanting to focus a little bit more on the almost kind of like the education piece as well, because so much of business is so focused on the traditional cognitive approach versus the ecological approach. So then there's that question of like education and
Exactly. That's it. Like when we talk about education, educators, coaches, business, all it is communication. It's
yeah,
language. It's putting information out for other people to detect vibrations from voice box, or obviously actions which goes to keys, which goes through computers, etc., etc. So the communication, if the communication is about something that is interesting, then people are going to detect it and they are going to consume it because it is interesting. If it is not,
mm,
if it is no change or variability, then the detection is going to be less significant. It's the same way that we perceive through the optic flow. If you've just got a tunnel of white going all the way down, there are less changes. So depth perception or distance is harder to estimate because there are less changes in optic flow. If there are rings around the tunnel, I'm talking about the B study from the ecological psychology video. If there are rings around the tunnel, there are more changes in the optic flow, in the optic array, which means there's more frequency in optic flow, so you can perceive distance easier. So when you're communicating information, if there are more changes, there's more variability, potentially challenge, it's going to be more attractive, which is why all the toxic stuff on social media gets the popularity because, oh, that's different, that's different, that's different. That's what gets the clicks because it's variable. It's different from the norm. And we have an approach that is different from the norm. So communicating that for me would be enough as long as it's communicated in a way that it allows, it affords individuals to detect the appropriate information. So that's where you're considering practice design as an educator. Practice
Mm.
design through email, education of attention and intention for calibration when learning will happen as individuals read through your work because they will learn,
Mm.
oh, well, I don't want to listen to this bit or I don't want to read that bit because that bit normally is bad. Like academic articles. I'm not going to read through the introduction because it's not going to tell me anything useful most of the time. I'm going to go straight to the discussion point, then have a look at the conclusion, then the results, then I'll have a look at the introduction and the lit review.
Okay.
So the goal, the purpose for me is communication. That's what I'm doing. For you, it could be something different. But for me, it's I want to communicate these ideas to other people that may find exploring the attractor landscape as beneficial. I recognize there were some jargon terms in there, but the idea still stands. I want people to explore. I don't want to give people answers. And that for me
Mm.
links in with the other topic that I wanted to discuss is qualifications, pieces of paper, the
Yeah.
certificates.
Yeah.
Because once you've got the tick box exercise, you're done. You've got the piece of
Mm.
paper, you're qualified. And obviously, Andrew has got his professor. He's a professor. He's got his degrees and etc. 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 But those pieces of paper don't actually mean anything. Okay, in the past, you have done enough work to do the tick boxes to get this thing. Great. I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything when it comes to your achievements and your past experience, because it does. There is validity in that. But just because you have done that in the past doesn't immediately give you this credibility stamp and say, okay, yeah, they are a credible source. No. You need to consistently prove that you are a credible source because you should, in my opinion, be able to lose those qualifications. Inside of sports coaching, there was a discussion during my undergraduate degree. Once you're a level one football coach, you're a level one football coach. If you do your level one 50 years ago, you're still a level one, even though yeah, exactly. Even though the research, the science, the training, the coaching, the philosophies, the ideas, all of that has evolved in 50 years, you're still a level one qualified. So if you were to do the new level one, you might fail. So you just don't do the new level one. Or even worse, you get to go on the level two because you're already a level one. So the person coming into it may know more than you, but they have to do the level one first. And because you did yours 50 years ago, you're fine. No, I think you should be able to lose your qualifications if you don't keep up to date with the research. Is that dangerous? No, because you have less expertise than those people that are active in the field. The way I look at it is I've got my level two coaching football. Am I a level two coach at football? No, because I haven't been engaged in coaching football. Do I have the knowledge about how to coach football? Yes, but I haven't coached football for 7 years, 8 years. So my knowledge of is extremely decreased because I haven't experienced it. I haven't been in the practice. I'm out of practice. So I think the level of qualification should be lower. Does that mean I'm going to coach different people? I don't think so. But my effectiveness of coaching will be different. And that
Mm.
is where I feel the qualifications lack. We're not going to get rid of qualifications. That's not going to happen. People always need certificates to say, oh, they are good at this thing. But in practice, when we're actually doing the thing, how effective are they? And when we look at Andrew, how effective is he? Well, he is effective at some things. Getting people to listen to a podcast, he's effective at that. Getting
Yeah.
people to talk about the science, he's effective at that. Helping individuals explore different areas, he's effective at that for some people.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, he's not. And when you look at some of the science, he's actually ineffective at doing some things, and deliberately so. He's deliberately ineffective at sharing information about ecological psychology because he doesn't know about it.
Yeah.
I'm deliberately ineffective at sharing information about cognitive psychology because
Yeah,
I don't want to be sharing information about cognitive psychology as a potential solution because I don't agree with it.
yeah.
I'm deliberately ineffective at that, and that to me is what is more effective in science communication when we talk about communicating science. What do we want to be more effective at, and what don't we want to be effective at?
Mm,
Where my question is when it comes to content creators is if they're not aware of things they're ineffective at and they don't like the public challenge, the public critique, or they don't want to be in public, how do they develop? How do they learn? How do we uphold their credibility? Because online, there's no pieces of papers, there's no certificates. It's just public discourse. But public discourse brings in your private life, which, love it or hate it, I don't think is that relevant.
no.
Is it relevant for my view of the person? Yes. Do I think Andrew is a behaviorally integral individual? No, because he doesn't act what he preaches from what
Mm,
I've seen. Does that impact how I use his information? No, because the information is still information shared from experiences that I'm detecting, and I can then use from my own experiences.
yeah.
So how would you suggest we as a, I guess, society, culture, individuals help maintain credibility, transparency, ability in science communication? What do you think that looks like?
Difficult. Yeah, it's something that I have been really thinking about from a coaching standpoint because, and I think we've discussed it off the podcast. I don't remember what we discussed it about. I don't have a formal qualification. I mean, there are no formal qualifications for coaching, not in but not in business anyway.
Caveat, 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 caveat. Like, like because you can get qualifications in business because some people create their own qualifications. So you can have qualifications for doing X thing for X business person in X sector of the
Oh
world
yes,
and
yeah,
countries.
yes,
Yeah.
you
So,
can.
but what does the qualification mean? Like, what's the meaning behind a piece of paper?
That is something I still don't know.
Exactly. I don't think most people like qualifications. They don't see the point of them. If they did see the point of them, more people would do them.
Mm. So when I looked into the ICF certification, the kind of like all
International
of that,
Coaching Federation.
yeah, the International Coaching Federation, I was like, yeah, but I mean, yes, ethics, great, good, duh,
Yep.
like duh, but the way to become qualified is to be told how to coach, and that is
Easier to assess.
easier to assess, but does not create an effective coach. It does not create because
Yoda
you,
there.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense. So as I explore these things, it's like, oh, I'll teach you how to coach and how to build your own model, and I'm just like, yeah, but why do I need you to help me build a model? Why
Hmm.
do I need a model? Like, why can't I just coach people?
Yep.
Like, yeah,
And and that's one of the biggest conversations in coach education, teacher education, education, or educators education, uh, is the qualifications, the certificates, the pieces of paper, whether it's public or in private institutions. Why would people get it? In sports coaching, most of the time you get your level one because you need your level one to start the club. In some sports, like trampoline, my sport, you need a level two. That's like £700 just to be able to start a trampoline club. Freaking expensive sport, I know. But you need the qualification to start the club. But once you've started the club, why do you need the qualification? Well, in football, well, you want to coach performance sport, elite sport. Well, what if I want to coach like 7-year-old Jimmy? What if I want to coach like 6-year-olds getting into sport? I just want to be a participation coach. Why do I want to do a level two that helps me become a performance coach? I don't need that. And it's the same inside of most other fields. I don't need that qualification to do what I want to do, but I still want to develop what I want to do. So I'm just going to do it on my own. So
yeah.
the qualification doesn't actually solve the problem of the people that are learning. It doesn't solve the learner's problem. It doesn't help the learners. It helps the assessors and the organizations that are pushing the assessments on the learners.
And as I looked at, so because obviously there was the businessy, coachy, coach, executive coaching, As I looked at it, I was just like, I think I would piss everybody off.
Hmm.
I would definitely piss people off. And to put it bluntly, I could probably just type the stuff into ChatGPT and it would get me a very high mark. And that to me is a problem.
But that there is, again, assumptions from traditional approaches in learning. Start with no knowledge, blank slate, tabula rasa. No, no, we don't start with no knowledge. When we start a course, we've had years of experience, oftentimes years of relevant experience. So when you're going into a course, you don't all start at the same point. And if you're going into a level one, for example, me in my context, I'll make it specific. I have a degree in sports coaching that took 3 years. I have a degree in strength and conditioning, which took 2 years. I have a further five, almost 6 years of independent research into the coaching, education, science, literature about learning. I'm going to go and do a level one trampoline course, which is
Jeez.
4 3-hour webinar sessions. I'm going into that context with drastically different levels of expertise than a 17-year-old trampolinist that's going to be coaching for the first time. Like, but we're going to be doing the same course. We're going to be asked the same questions. We're probably going to be told the same pieces of information. I could ask a question that I don't want to sound boastful here, but I could ask a question that goes beyond the tutor's expertise. Why in the effing world would I pay to do that level one? Because I need the piece of paper.
Mm.
That to me is a huge problem. The ability to transfer knowledge, transfer information, transfer my experience, whatever word you want to put there, should be applicable in the qualification. If you're going from one field of expertise to another field of expertise, the new field of expertise shouldn't assume that you know nothing about that field or about relevant information.
Because that was something that happened for me. I went and did um, an introduction to what it was Gestalt, which
Hmm.
I already had researched and studied and had that expertise in Gestalt coaching. So I walked in there and I, strictly speaking, by their own like regulations, should not have been invited into that program as I was not a level one coach
Hmm.
or whatever I wasn't ICF certified at level one.
Yeah.
I had no experience of coaching and so should not have been allowed in there. But I was in, and everyone said, "You are, I don't know how you are so good at what you're like for someone who has no experience, you are an incredibly effective coach." And I'm like, yeah, well, I've been doing it for
Years.
6, 7 years.
Yeah.
Like, if we just think professionally from a business point.
Yeah. But it's
But
it's
if
the
I was
same.
to go and do an ICF, I'd have to do an ICF level one, and then I need another 100 hours of
Mm.
like
But
where I'm
it,
coaching people.
and this
But
is the thing, it's the same with other people when they go into courses. I've been practicing X thing, I'm going to go do a level one. This level one's useless. And when we look online, most
mm,
people online have experienced other content creators, have done their own research. And I'm not a fan of the term, but those neurodiverse individuals have likely done their own research. They've likely gone
yes.
down multiple rabbit holes because they're
Oh,
curious.
yes.
So if you do speak with those people, they're not blank slate tabula rasa people. They all have experience and opinions. So it's not I'm going to tell people how to do something. I'm going to give them the protocols that help them find the best solution. No, you're exposing them to your experiences and information, which they can then use to help educate themselves, self-organized solutions. But if the information is put out there as this is the answer, it constrains that way that they could be detecting and using that information, which I personally don't grasp as an educator why someone would want to do that. Like Andrew's a professor. Why does he say these are the protocols step by steps? Why not expose the science, expose the information, and then people are given the information for them to figure out their own solutions? Some people will recognize that and go, well, that won't work for me. I'm going to use this bit, but I'm going to throw that bit. Some people will do that. Other people won't. And from what I've seen, most people won't. Most
Mm.
people prefer to follow instructions because whether you like it or not, in school, that's the way most of the time we tend to behave. We just follow, we do as we're told so we don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And that is a worry. And the way I would like to see this online is less of a saying things as a matter of fact, saying things as a certainty or as a evidence supports this, so this is the thing. The less linear, concrete answers and more ongoing discussions. What that looks like for me is maybe a discussion that is talking about mistakes, going down the line of making mistakes. When you're coaching a skill, you amplify errors. Amplification of errors helps. So maybe someone goes in and deliberately talks about the things that are wrong. They deliberately go down the wrong lines, wrong being less effective in this context. You deliberately talk about it, but then the conversation shifts either in the same video, in future videos, and then you see the learning experiences. I like Andrew's podcasts because it exposes some effective ways, but it's not effective for everyone. What I don't like about his podcast is he doesn't explore the other areas, the oh, it doesn't work for this person, let's explore this, or it might not work for that person, let's explore this, or this study doesn't actually support any of these people, so let's have a look at that.
So
It seems
that's an interesting thing for us because we are very much ecological approach
yeah,
is the way as such.
well, it's processes, verbs, not nouns.
So when even just from what I'm hearing there is like even just by talking about the ecological approach, we are doing exactly the thing that you want to do because we're not talking about a step by step. It's this is a way of, this is a way of, this is a way of. Yeah.
And for those that are at this part of the episode, through the episode, we have made mistakes. I know I've made mistakes because as
Yeah.
I've said stuff, I'm like, no, I disagree with that. And then I've either rephrased it or I've moved off on a topic. But
Yeah. Same.
it's constantly dynamic. So the only benefit I can see with listening to conversations is to listen and go, okay, I agree with that, I disagree with this, and then engaging in that thinking. Whether that is leaving a comment or just thinking on your own, it's entirely up to you. I would much
Mm.
rather like I would much rather 20 people listen to this podcast, but then really address a topic, an idea, a concept, something that they started thinking about as we were talking, than
Mm.
1,000 people and then loads of comments and all the comments being, thanks, great listen, that was good, great watch.
Mm.
It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not impactful, to use a buzzword.
Yeah.
So we are talking about things, we're making mistakes, but we're sharing them, and we can then learn from those mistakes. Sometimes we amplify errors, which is where like I'll probe you and ask you a question, and you're like, I think it's this. Actually, no, I don't think it's this. I think it's this. Actually, maybe it's not this.
No, it's not that. It's this. Oh, yeah, and it's that. Oh, wait, that's a thing. Like that happened today for me. Of like, oh, I did not see this and this. And I don't think you were even asking about that. It was just through this organization environment relationship. It's a
Organism
two
environment relationship.
organism.
It's either
Yeah.
self-function or organism environment relationship. You can't have organization environment. Yeah, that no, there's mixing terms.
Us.
Yeah, the context.
Yeah, that's much easier.
Yep.
The context. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's cool.
Yeah. I don't have anything else that I would like to add to this conversation. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, don't think so.
Yeah, I think we've covered all of your notes, and I think we've covered the points that I wanted to cover quite nicely.
Awesome.
And of course, as mentioned, if you do have any points, thoughts, comments, leave them either on YouTube or send us messages somewhere, wherever your preferred platform is.
Yeah.
Bye.